Stewart Baker is a Lawfare contributor, and Ned Ryun is the founder and CEO of American Majority. They join me from Washington. And Sarah Kendzior is the author of The View From Flyover Country. She joins me now from St. Louis. Welcome to you all. All right, let's start with Paul Manafort's lawsuit. His complaint says in part that the Mueller investigation is completely unmoored from the special counsel's original jurisdiction to investigate any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump. What's your analysis of that argument, Sarah?
Well, from what I've gathered from legal experts, the lawsuit was predictable. I think it's clear that Manafort has committed a number of offenses dating back to the money laundering charges that he's already been faced with, and going up through his management of the campaign and the illicit contacts that he made during that time. So I would expect, in addition to this lawsuit probably being dismissed, more charges to be brought against Manafort and against others who were involved in the Trump campaign.
Ned, I imagine you disagree.
I'd probably have a little bit of a different opinion. I mean, obviously, a lot of the charges that were brought against Manafort and his business partner Gates had a lot to do with, the FBAR and the FAR, failures, failing to file the foreign bank registration and also failing to file as a foreign agent. So I think 7 of the 12 charges brought against him had to do with those two issues. And, I would just argue a lot of this had to do with a lot of behavior years before the election, and it just confirmed what a lot of us in D.C. already knew. Paul Manafort was a bit of a sleazy guy who was trying to evade taxes and failed to file that he was working on behalf of a foreign entity. So I'm not really sure what this has to do with Russian collusion. It just shows us that Paul Manafort had some very questionable behavior years before the campaign.
Stewart, what's your take?
Well, I agree with Sarah that this doesn't really address the question of whether he did the things he's accused of in the indictment. What he's really saying, and he's invoking, I think, the Administrative Procedure Act, is the wrong guy is prosecuting me. This is somebody who doesn't have the authority to go this far afield in his investigation. He'll probably find a forum for that, but I do agree that it's a bit of an uphill fight for him.
And Stewart, a lawyer for the Trump transition last year accused Bob Mueller of unlawfully obtaining transition emails from the General Services Administration. To what extent are you seeing evidence that Mueller has overstepped his bounds?
I'm also a little skeptical of that argument. It was an aggressive step, and that's a little troubling that his team felt they should be that aggressive. But this was the General Services Administration. They apparently had rules that said these are our emails and we can share them as we choose. It may have been a surprise to the transition team, but it appears to have been a pretty clear policy.
Ned, let me turn to you. The founders of Fusion GPS, the firm behind the infamous Steele dossier, want their Senate Judiciary testimony made public. Now, the committee's chairman, Chuck Grassley, invited them to testify again, this time in public. But do you think the committee should release the original testimony?
I actually do. I mean, I was hoping actually that any time the Fusion GPS founders, Glenn Simpson and the others were testifying, that it would be in a public setting under oath. That was what I had been hoping for and pushing for. So I have to confess I was disappointed when it was behind closed doors. So I want to see transparency on all of this, and I do want them to testify under oath in a public setting. I just think it's kind of interesting to see this shift, especially with their op-ed, I think it was today or yesterday, about how saying that the dossier that they put together really wasn't the beginning of the Trump-Russia collusion investigation, when in fact many of us do believe that it was a very real part of the genesis of this investigation. So I want to see answers, questions and answers done in a public setting. I want extreme transparency, not only on this issue, but Elaine, I think there's a lot of things that need to be addressed in regards to the DOJ and the FBI. I think the only way we get to that is to have extreme transparency and have a lot of things declassified that took place over the last 8 years.
Sarah, let me ask you about Fusion GPS specifically. What is the calculus, you think, for the Fusion GPS founders in weighing a public testimony?
Well, the Fusion GPS founders said themselves that they also would like to make these documents transparent. They're calling on Congress to release them. So I think this may be one of these issues where we're all in agreement that we do need more transparency in this investigation. But we also need more transparency into the acts that have been committed by this administration as a whole. I think in sort of nitpicking at where did the investigation officially begin, what has it been inspired by, the reason there's so much debate about that is because there is such a vast number of heinous infractions actions that have been committed flagrantly by the Trump administration and by the campaign that it's hard to keep track of the cast of characters and all the people involved. But Elaine, what? I'm serious. I don't know how you can really dispute that. The list is incredibly long, and that's why there's a bombshell dropping every day, and that's why this investigation has been going on for such a long time.
But the response back that I would say is, if you think this is a fake dossier funded by the Democrats that spurred this investigation, it calls into question, is this actually a legitimate investigation even to begin with? And in my op-ed at the Hill, I wrote about this. But it's not a fake dossier by the Democrats. It's a dossier that doesn't have any kind of partisan origin, and many of its claims have been verified by the actions that have been revealed through the emails that the Trump campaign put funded by Democrats.
Let me jump in here, and let me turn to Stewart, because, Stewart, I want to ask you, from your perspective, what do you see as the role that this Steele dossier is playing in the congressional investigations and the Mueller probe?
Well, I think it does raise a question about how this investigation started and whether a piece of Oppo research paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign played a big role in the launching of this investigation, and then later played a big role in turning this into a public scandal when it was leaked. So it is fair to ask those questions, whether this was part of the FISA, the Intercept case that was made to begin this investigation. Those are all fair questions, and I think Fusion GPS's role in this still hasn't been fully explored and probably deserves more attention.
Ned, you mentioned the piece for The Hill, and in that piece you ask, quote, is this entire investigation into the fairy tale of Trump-Russia collusion in 2016 even legitimate? But if the investigation is based on a faulty premise, which you argue, why can't we trust investigators to ultimately discover that, you think?
Well, so that's what I want to get to the bottom of. What was the role of this Fusion GPS dossier? Was it used to gain a FISA warrant to spy on American citizens? Again, now we know that even Comey called it salacious and unverified, but back up about 9 months, did the FBI, did the DOJ use that dossier as part of their evidence to secure a FISA warrant? What is the role that it played? How did it get into the hands of the DOJ? How did it get into the hands of the FBI? How did it get into the hands of the CIA? Again, it all goes back to, Elaine, I want extreme transparency. I want to know how all of this took place. I think the American people are due that. And over the course of the last 18 months, it has played a key role. So I think we deserve answers on how it came into being, how it got into the mix, and again, the role that it played in leading to this entire investigation. And again, I would argue a fake dossier funded by Democrats really calls into question the legitimacy of the entire investigation.
So now we have this investigation as well as congressional investigations taking place against the backdrop of this. Steve Bannon, the president's former chief strategist, quoted in a forthcoming book that the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting was treasonous. I want to get each of your takes on this, starting with you, Sarah. What do you read into that?
I agree that the June meeting was treasonous, but I had that view before Bannon said it. I'm a bit skeptical about this book, since it is written by Michael Wolff. I think he's trying to have a bestseller. I think he has a history of fabrication. But it's very important to remember that Steve Bannon and Donald Trump also have a history of fabrication. So you have three people who are prone to making things up, who value money, who value attention, and two of them may be involved in a federal criminal inquiry. And so I think it's important to keep all of that in mind as we're assessing the legitimacy of various claims that they make.
What about you, Ned?
Well, first of all, I mean, in regards to that whole Russia meeting, first of all, I know Bannon. I am a bit perplexed by his statements. Again, I know both Trump and Bannon, so I'm going to stay out of the middle of this and let them duke it out. At the same time, I wouldn't go so far as to have said the meeting was treasonous. Was it ill-advised? Absolutely. I don't know why they didn't have Don McGahn in that meeting. And once they realized there was an actor from the Russian state, not only did they not get a lawyer involved, but they should have called the FBI. So I would agree that there were some mistakes made by people that I considered political neophytes at the time. So, not crazy about that meeting taking place. I don't think I'd go as far as Bannon, though, in saying it was treasonous.
Stewart, what about you? I mean, it's a pretty intense charge to call that meeting treasonous.
Although consistent with Bannon's general view, when once you're a bad guy, you are the spawn of Satan in his book. And he does not like Jared Kushner and never has.
He does not.
And so I think he is using that meeting and the most aggressive language to put Ivanka and Jared as far under the bus as he can get them.
All right, hold that thought. We are going to continue this discussion in just a moment, but right now we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching Red and Blue.